In Laboratory Reddit, today's story is:
My sick grandfather cut off all contact with the family in the last days of his life, but his funeral revealed the heartbreaking truth that changed our lives forever. My grandfather, Roger, has been ill for several years. He can now hardly get out of bed and needs constant supervision. At the beginning of the year, the doctors gave him less than 12 months to live, and they are not the kind of people who are wrong in these prognoses. They told us that if Granddad made it to the end of the year it would be practically a miracle, and that we should forget the idea that he could live any longer. However, this did not make him sad at all. Granddad had always been a very optimistic and affectionate person, always cheerful. He had a gift for making those around him happy, which is why his sudden change in attitude came as such a surprise to everyone. My grandparents raised me from a young age. I lost my parents when I was very young, and I don't even have a single memory of them. I've only ever seen them in photographs. I do think about them occasionally, but I can't say that I miss them very much. My grandparents provided me with a wonderful life. My grandparents have a considerable fortune, but note that I do not include myself in that mention. This is because my grandfather decided to raise me differently from the rest of the family. He wanted me to be independent of his wealth. So, although my grandparents paid for everything I needed during my upbringing, they did not give me a luxurious lifestyle. It was an excellent decision, because I don't think I would have developed the same respect for money and hard work if I had been brought up differently. Although many family members consider me unfortunate for not having access to that fortune, it has never really bothered me. Unlike them, I have never coveted my grandfather's money. Before his health deteriorated, I actually planned to become independent. My grandmother passed away about 4 years ago, and a few months later I had to leave for university. Obviously, I resisted leaving because I knew how difficult it had been for Grandpa to lose Grandma, but he smiled at me and told me that I was too old to be sad about death for a long time. He explained that he had shared more than 60 years with Grandma, and that he considered himself lucky to have had her in his life. His only sadness was that he had always told her that he would be the first to go, so he wouldn't have to face the farewell. That conversation was both moving and melancholic. Grandpa wouldn't let me stay at home, so I left for university. I graduated about a year ago and started my career as an intern. I had focused my attention on my personal and professional life, although I continued to visit him periodically. But when his health deteriorated significantly, I returned home to take care of him. Grandfather was opposed to this, insisting that he had hired staff to look after him, but I paid no attention to his protests. I changed jobs and moved closer to his house. Since then, I have devoted myself to caring for him, and until a few months ago, everything was going smoothly. Obviously, my grandfather has other relatives, but they all seem only interested in his fortune. Most of our relatives are still financially dependent on our grandfather, but although they need his financial support, they don't care enough about him to visit him occasionally. However, since our grandfather's health began to deteriorate, more and more relatives have started to show up, pretending to be concerned. I don't like to say it, but many are simply waiting for him to die so they can claim their share of the inheritance. Numerous relatives, including my younger uncle, grandfather's youngest son, lie and steal money, situations that I have discovered on numerous occasions. But I have never revealed this to my grandfather. He loves everyone equally and always offers help when someone is going through difficulties. He doesn't care if they lie to him or not. Money is not a priority for him. My grandfather clearly perceives that many relatives are only interested in his fortune, but that doesn't seem to affect him. He loves his whole family unconditionally. That's why, when I discovered that some people were lying to him and stealing from him, I decided not to tell him, anticipating the response he would give me. Initially, I feared that knowing the truth would break his heart, but I was quite sure that Granddad wasn't naive enough not to realize that some relatives were clearly trying to take advantage of him. He just didn't care enough about his family to let them use his money that way. One day, when I returned from work, I overheard my Uncle Jim and Aunt Sophie plotting something. They were discussing how they could pretend to be more affectionate and important than the other relatives. They especially wanted Grandpa to value them more than me. I approached them and told them they didn't need to make a show of it. All they needed to do was genuinely care for their father, who wouldn't be alive for much longer. Jim flew into a rage and told me that I didn't have the moral stature to talk to him that way, adding that I was looking for exactly the same thing from Grandpa. I replied that our intentions were completely different and that Grandpa wouldn't favor one over the other. He had always been fair to everyone, and I mentioned this because, like Jim and Sophie, many relatives were jealous, thinking that Grandpa loved me more than them. This wasn't really true, but because of this perception, some had even tried to frame me. However, Grandpa never believed their lies, as he trusted me completely in every respect. That is why I am so surprised by his behavior over the last 2 months. I don't understand what happened or if someone influenced this change. It all started when I had to be away for a few days. I tried to contact a relative to visit my grandfather, but he insisted that he would be fine, so I left. When I returned and checked on him, he was extremely rude to me. He asked me not to visit him, and although I insisted on asking him what had happened, he refused to listen to me and ordered me to return home. I had never witnessed such behavior from my grandfather, especially towards me. I returned home and tried to contact him the following day, hoping he had calmed down. I suspected that a family member had intervened negatively. In any case, I went to visit him again the next day, but his attitude had not changed. He was still upset and avoided talking about the matter. When I insisted on discussing it, he threw me out and cut off all contact with me. Outraged, I contacted my uncle, convinced that he or another relative was responsible for this situation. But what I discovered was even stranger considering Grandpa's usual personality. It turns out that he had cut off all contact with the whole family. He didn't want to talk to any of us. My Uncle Jim thought that I had orchestrated all this, but when he found out that he had rejected me too, he was astonished. Jim asked me if Grandpa had lost his mind, but that seemed unlikely considering that he was under practically constant supervision. If something significant had happened, I would have heard about it. I questioned all the employees at Grandpa's house and no one had any idea what had triggered this behavior. But this isn't even the worst part. Yesterday I was finally able to talk to Grandpa and his words are still echoing in my mind. Since he cut ties with me, I had persistently tried to communicate with him, but he kept rejecting me, reiterating that he didn't want to see me. However, yesterday he allowed me into his room. I asked him what was going on and how I could help. He replied that he was cutting off contact with everyone because that was what he had decided. He said he didn't want a family like ours. I reminded him that just 2 months ago he appreciated everyone equally, to which he replied that that feeling had changed. I told him he couldn't do this, that we were his family. He replied with a serious expression that he no longer considered us as such. Immediately, my eyes filled with tears. I asked him if he was losing his mind and he assured me that he was perfectly well, then he asked me to leave again. But before I left, he instructed me to inform everyone that no one would receive his inheritance. I have not shared this information with anyone because I know it would cause chaos. I cannot understand what is happening to Granddad or how to handle this situation. If there is no physical condition causing this behavior, I think he is acting this way because he feels he has little time left. Perhaps he is experiencing anger at feeling his life is coming to an end. It is difficult to imagine what is going through his mind at the moment. No one in the family has experienced a similar situation, for obvious reasons, to understand it. Update 1. Months have passed since my initial publication. I wanted to thank you and provide another update, but life sometimes absorbs all our time. I am doing so now, although unfortunately this update does not bring good news. During this period, even after my grandfather told me that he no longer considered me part of his family, I continued to try to find out what was happening. His words broke my heart, but I could not abandon him. I loved him deeply, so I persisted in my attempts, but he flatly refused to allow me into the house after our last conversation. My grandfather's health was progressively worsening, and I feared he would die soon. When my Uncle Jim found out that Grandpa would leave nothing to anyone, not even to me, he decided to tell everyone. When we discussed this, I asked him to keep the information secret temporarily, as we really didn't know if it was true. He replied that Grandpa himself had confirmed that no one would receive any inheritance, and asked me if I was involved in that decision. I assured him that I had nothing to do with it, and that I was trying to calm Grandpa down so that he would return to normal. I begged him not to inform anyone, but he acted according to his own will. As expected, as soon as the relatives most interested in the inheritance found out, they reacted frantically. Some refused to believe it, while others went directly to the grandfather to beg him, arguing that they had done nothing wrong. But they quickly discovered that he would not change his decision. Many of you asked me if I was worried about the inheritance. As I mentioned earlier, money has never been a priority for me, as I was brought up to be self-sufficient. Since leaving university, I have not used a single penny of my grandfather's money, so the inheritance does not mean much to me. However, it clearly means everything to my relatives. They tried to persuade Granddad to reconsider his decision, but they failed miserably. In about 2 months, they also realized that there was no way he would change his mind. My Uncle Jim kept insisting that I intervene, but I explained to him that I had already exhausted all the resources to re-establish a good relationship with Granddad without success, so getting the inheritance for them would be practically impossible. I was completely convinced that, with time, My grandfather's irritation would dissipate and he would return to his normal state, so I waited patiently. But there was no change. Last night he passed away in his sleep. I didn't even get to say goodbye to him, even though I had known for some time that he wouldn't be around much longer. I had been preparing myself mentally to face his absence, but I never imagined that I wouldn't even have the chance of a farewell. I find it somewhat ironic that all the other relatives seemed more devastated than I was when they found out about Granddad's death. All those people who never showed any real concern for him were inconsolable, not because they had lost my grandfather, but because they had lost his fortune. They are showing more sadness than I am, but for completely the wrong reasons. I think it is quite clear that Granddad didn't change his mind before he died. From what I hear, he left his entire fortune to various charities, which is actually a very noble thing to do. I just wish he had been his usual self, at least in his final days. I really wanted to have a chat with him and get some advice before he passed away. It makes me deeply sad that our last interaction was an argument where he told me that I was no longer part of his family. Just thinking about it makes me feel sick. That's all that happened, and now I'm organizing the funeral. But no member of the family wants to help. They are all furious with my grandfather, and in a way I understand their feelings. But I hope they can forgive him and offer their help. I miss my grandfather immensely. I wish I had managed to convince him to reveal to me what really happened. Update 2. This time it hasn't taken me so long to return with a new update. 2 days have passed and the funeral will be held tomorrow. The main problem is that no member of my family will attend. They are so angry with Grandpa that they don't even want to go to his funeral to show a minimum of respect. Since my last update, I have been extremely busy with the funeral arrangements, and believe me, it has been extremely difficult. It was especially complicated because no family member was willing to help me. I had to take care of most of the planning and organization myself, with only a few hired professionals for support. I have already called and pleaded with them, but they have all flatly refused to do anything for Grandpa. To them, he has become a despicable being who left them without an inheritance. From the beginning, I knew that most of the relatives did not feel genuine affection for my grandfather, but this clear manifestation that they were only interested in his money is excessive. My grandfather is the reason why they all enjoy comfortable lives, but they have stopped valuing that and focus exclusively on the lost inheritance. Although all members of my family have declined to help or attend the funeral, there will still be numerous attendees. My grandfather was a well-known person who cultivated many friendships throughout his life. With so many friends, naturally, I wanted the funeral to be an event that my grandfather would be proud of. I haven't had many people attend, but I have done my best and I think Grandpa would be pleased with my arrangements. We had often talked about funerals and he had always told me how he would like his to be. He didn't want an overly sad event, but rather for people to remember him with joy. That is how it will be tomorrow. All his friends and acquaintances will be there, and the only ones absent will be his so-called family. Although for my grandfather, I think his real family will be the people who attend tomorrow. Obviously, he didn't want it to happen like this. I called Jim personally and begged him to attend the funeral. I reminded him that he was his own father and that, regardless of any circumstances, he deserved to have his son present. He replied that Roger was no longer his father and that he hated him. I spoke to many other family members and received similar responses. They all hated Grandpa and refused to attend the funeral. Many asked me if they would receive any financial benefit for attending, and I relayed to them what the lawyer had indicated to me during the organization of the funeral. Grandfather's legal advisor informed me that they would get absolutely nothing, even if they participated in the event. I reminded them that it's not all about money. Since the family already knew that Grandfather had left nothing for them, they saw no reason to attend. I pleaded with them, arguing that Grandpa would have been pleased to see his whole family together at the funeral. They replied that they would prefer it if it wasn't like that. They didn't want to have anything to do with him. I tried my best, but I couldn't persuade anyone to attend. I will probably be the only family member present at the funeral. I feel really sorry about this situation, but I can't change their way of thinking. Update 3. The funeral took place yesterday and I have numerous important developments to share. I was anxious to find a moment to write this update. For most of the ceremony I was completely absorbed by the organizational responsibilities. I kept hoping that at least some of the family would turn up, but they didn't. No one from the family, apart from me, attended the funeral, although many people who loved and respected Granddad did. This was a partial relief and I was glad to see how many people cared about him and spoke positively about him. I gave a short speech about my deep affection for him and what he meant to me. I also tried to justify my family's absence when someone asked about them. But inside, I felt great indignation towards them, as it clearly showed that no one felt any real concern for him. However, It turned out that my grandfather was much more astute than I imagined, which became clear after the funeral. Grandfather's lawyer announced that he had an important announcement. Microphone in hand, he revealed that grandfather had requested that this announcement be made once the ceremony was over. The lawyer explained that months ago, during the weekend that I was away for work, grandfather had contacted him and asked him to do something unusual. He indicated that he wished to modify his will. Grandfather asked him to change his will, stipulating that only close relatives who attended his funeral could receive part of his fortune. The total amount would be divided equally among all the family members present, and if no one attended, all the assets would go to charity. A percentage would always be reserved for charity, regardless of the number of attendees. So the reason for my grandfather's strange behavior towards all of us was to find out who really appreciated him and who didn't. He wanted to make sure that his wealth benefited only those family members who showed genuine affection towards him. When I understood what he had done, I couldn't help but wonder when he had planned all this. I was a little offended that he decided to test my love for him as well. He wanted to evaluate everyone on an equal footing, but he could have been less harsh on me. As I reflected on this, I noticed that everyone was watching me, including the lawyer. Then I understood the situation. I was the only immediate family member present. The lawyer then added, a person Roger trusted, and he was glad he hadn't made a mistake. He then explained that, according to Grandpa's wishes, his entire fortune would be distributed among the family members present. I looked around and said, I'm the only relative here. The lawyer replied, well, that means there's nothing to divide, does it? My grandfather's entire estate is mine, or at least it will be mine soon. I couldn't believe it and said that I couldn't accept such a large amount of money. He replied, that's exactly what Roger wanted. It's specified in the will. By now the news has spread far and wide and soon all the relatives will know. I'm pretty sure they will think I deliberately orchestrated all this, even though I had begged them all to attend. I have disconnected my phone because I anticipated what will happen, days and days of calls from relatives demanding their share. Finally, the lawyer gave me a letter that my grandfather left for me, but I haven't read it yet. I still feel some resentment because he organized all this, even testing my loyalty. Why didn't he just tell me the truth? He knows perfectly well that money has never mattered to me. Update 4. I need to update you on the events of the last 2 months. As I anticipated in my last update, just one day later, everyone was already aware of the situation and trying to contact me incessantly. As I predicted, my family suspected that I had used some kind of manipulation to inherit the entire estate. I didn't even try to explain the situation to them, knowing that no one would listen to me. I simply turned off my phone. A few hours after my previous update, I decided to read the letter my grandfather left me. The first section expressed his pride in me and described the kind of life he wanted for me. I will treasure that part as a personal treasure. He then explained how he knew I would be upset with him for this strategy, but that he wanted to be fair. That's why he decided to include me in the test, even though I had nothing to prove to him. He apologized for playing with my feelings in that way and asked my forgiveness for not allowing me to say goodbye properly. He also asked me not to get too sad. He offered me some advice and emphasized that, regardless of how many relatives asked me for money, I should never, under any circumstances, share what I had received from him. The money was intended exclusively for those who deserved it, and even if it was only for me, he insisted that I did not share it. Furthermore, regardless of how many people turned up, he wanted me to live in our family home. In the letter, he asked me to move there. He also explained another reason why he decided to distance himself from me during his final stage. While he felt ill, I would not live my life to the full, constantly staying by his side. Besides, he hated goodbyes and did not wish to have one with me. As I read all the praise he expressed about me, he finally wished me goodbye. He wished me a long and happy life, and it simultaneously made me happy and sad to read him expressing himself normally again, something I had longed to witness before his departure. The next day, my Uncle Jim was the first to come forward to confront me. He questioned me about how I had managed it, and I assured him that I had done absolutely nothing. It was the express will of Granddad, who had offered everyone an equal opportunity to receive part of his fortune. I explained that he and the other relatives were the ones who had failed the test. This made him furious. I reminded him that I had begged him, and many others, to cooperate or at least attend the funeral, but it was they who rejected my grandfather. Then I asked him to stop pestering me, and he left. Other relatives continued to harass me by asking for money, but I persisted in ignoring them. I later moved to my grandfather's residence, and the family began to show up daily, demanding what they called justice. They spread the word among acquaintances that I had taken away their rightful inheritance by manipulating my grandfather. They tried to get other friends and relatives to line up against me, presenting me as the villain of the situation. I asked some of my grandfather's loyal employees to carry out an exhaustive investigation into the relatives who were embezzling money, and it turned out that there were many of them. Consequently, I dismissed them from the jobs that grandfather had provided for them and suspended any financial assistance they continued to receive. I cut the whole family off from any financial assistance from grandfather, which increased their irritation. They did everything they could to fight these decisions, but to no avail. I had full authority to proceed as I saw fit, but I implemented these measures solely to honor Grandpa's wishes. Personally, I have no interest in this inheritance. The family tried to take legal action against me to obtain what they considered to be their right, but they only wasted time and resources. Grandfather meticulously ensured that no one could take the money away from its rightful beneficiaries, although he probably did not anticipate that I would be the only one. A week ago, many relatives, including Jim, Sophie and others, came begging for help because they lacked employment and financial support, finding themselves in a precarious situation. They promised to do anything in exchange for assistance and vowed never to steal funds from the family businesses again. At that moment, I decided that the grandfather would help them, but not in the way they expected. I offered them jobs, but different to the ones they had before. I have assigned most of the family members basic jobs that require considerable effort, so that they also understand the value of money. They had no choice but to accept, and many are now working hard. They hate it, but they have no choice. And obviously, I'm not giving them money for free. The people who stole funds are working twice as hard as before for the same pay. I think it's an excellent strategy. They are learning the value of every hard-earned dollar, and I think Grandpa would have loved to see it. I just hope I have honored his wishes properly. God, I miss him so much. Update 5. This update is necessary to inform you of the current situation of my relatives, especially those who agreed to work for me. I recognize that not everyone approved of my decision to employ people who apparently did not deserve it. However, this was part of a broader plan, which has now proven effective. Furthermore, if any of the relatives had proven their worth as workers, even if the positions were not particularly prominent, they could have redeemed themselves. It was their chance, although I can anticipate that this has not been the case. I always sensed that my relatives would show their true nature sooner or later, and eventually they have done so. Some resigned quickly. I suppose they hope to regain their former privileges. However, I never promised them that, only the opportunity to learn the value of honest work. So they left to look for other job opportunities. However, those who have found other employment are no better off than those I offered, while others have not even found new employment. The rest have been dismissed. Currently, there are no family members left working. The reasons for dismissal were further attempts at theft, with the difference that there was now constant supervision. When they tried, immediate action was taken, and lawsuits have even been filed against these people, so they have lost their jobs in even worse conditions than when they started. Relatives who desperately needed income can't even work honestly, even if their livelihood depended on it. That test that my grandfather designed now makes more sense, because if he had left his fortune in their hands, they would currently be a group of people with a mentality of unjustified privilege and excessive free time.